I finished the ribbing and binded it off with a tabular bind off for the clean look. I'm going back to working on the sleeve, and I went to reread the instructions, and it honestly does not make sense to me. The written instructions and the schematic does not add up. My original understanding is that you first work 140 rounds of the stripe pattern, and then you work 9 rounds of the stripe pattern while working the decreases. The funny part is, the decreases are done on the 10th round 14 times, which brings the sleeve to a total length of 280 rounds. And if I convert that back into centimeters, my sleeve would measure 87.5 centimeters. Do I look like a monkey who would have a 2-meter wingspan? Plus, my understanding of the pattern also does not match up with the schematic that shows a tapered sleeve starting immediately after the ribbing. So I guess what the designer actually means is that the stripe pattern is 149 rounds in total, and then the decreases are done on the first 140 rounds, which would make more sense than whatever I was thinking. So in conclusion, I may have misinterpreted the pattern. I messaged the designer on Ravelry to seek some clarification, but she has yet to reply to me. If she responds back, I will keep you updated. In the meantime, I'm going to assume that my original understanding of the pattern is wrong and frog this back to 1 round before the lifeline. Update time! I'm done with the first sleeve. I finished it off with a half twisted rib like I did for the beginning and binded it off with a tabular bind off. The designer actually got back to me and clarified how the decreases work, and she was so helpful in her response, which I was very grateful for receiving. And it turns out that my updated understanding of the sleeve decreases were right. And I don't know what I was on in the beginning, but yeah. Once I got closer to the end, it was quite difficult to knit it up since I had to start doing magic loop. I'm a bit tired of working on the sleeve though, so I'll start on the body instead. This has proved to be a challenge of its own. The body is worked bottom up, so it starts with the ribbing. At first, I did a tabular cast on, but it ended up looking quite messy. I frogged that version and tried it again, and this is the result. It's way better than the first one, but I spotted a mistake. I don't think there's a way for me to drop the stitch and then ladder it back, so I'll have to cast it on again. Hopefully, 3rd time's the charm. there are some differences between the two other than the obvious. I cast it on using the long tail cast on 4mm needles. The tubular cast on looked a bit messy to me, so I decided to go with what's tried and tested. However, I did stick with the half twisted rib and have since been following the pattern accordingly. After many mishaps with the neckline, I dove in straight into the armhole. If I worked on the neckline any longer, I would have crashed out. Anyway, I am pleased to report that the armhole went fairly well. I was a bit worried that it might be too tight, but if it's fine, please ignore all these stitch markers at the moment. The buttonhole is also on the smaller side, but we'll make do. Before I start on the second armhole, I'm going to finish the neckline off. I just want to get it done and over with. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna frog a few rows so that it's not too high, and then bind it off with my usual method, which is to pass the stitches over one another on 4mm needles. The ribbing seems to only become an issue when it gets too high, so hopefully this would solve that. I also forgot to give you my haul the other day. I basically got a pair of 3 and 3.5mm needles. Working magic loop for the neckline and the armhole was really starting to annoy me, and I knew I couldn't continue that for the sleeves, so I decided to just get a pair of extra needles. I am planning on buying a set of chagus when the time is right, so I have avoided buying anything that might be found in the set. So instead I got the 3.5mm in quartz, which is the squarish shaped needle, and because they don't have the 3mm in the quartz as well, I settled for the spin bamboo ones.